Hello, everyone, and from New York City, I'm Dan at Hasselblad, here to talk to you about the latest developments and updates from your favorite Swedish camera manufacturer. Today, we'll start with an overview of the 907X50C, what makes it so unique and amazing, followed by updates to Phocus Mobile 2, our mobile app for iPad and now iPhone. We'll wrap with a few examples and ways that you can use these two together and take your questions at the end. Now, as a reminder, today's session is being recorded and will be available to watch afterwards simply by searching for Hasselblad webinar on YouTube. Starting with the 907X, the impression it makes is instantly distinctive, but with all things new, there's also a reference to the past. In the timeless and sleek lines of the 907X, you can clearly see its lineage to the V system and roots to iconic cameras like the 500C, with its modular components of camera body, film back, and lens. Of course, that lineage doesn't stop at a visual aesthetic because it also carries on to technical capabilities. You can take the digital back from the 907X and attach it to that same 500C. In terms of compatibility, the digital back can be fit to an impressive line of V-System cameras, from the purely mechanical 500, 501, or 503, to their focal plane siblings with the 200 and 2000 series. Super wide cameras from the SWCM forward can be used like the SWCM 903 and 905, and EL motorized cameras get an improvement thanks to a battery design in the digital back that we'll talk about in a second. Specialist models like the arc body, the flex body, even view cameras with a V-mount on the rear standard can be used. Now, we saw at registration that a number of you are current V-System owners, so we'd like to go ahead and actually open up a poll here to see what of those V-System cameras that you own. So feel free to mention those, saying, oh wow, a lot of love for the 500 series already. Love to see it, love to see it. Great, we'll go ahead and close that now. We really appreciate you responding there, and good to know where we are headed and what we can discuss on a little bit further. Now, from the get-go, the back is sold exclusively paired with a 907X body, and this is because it offers you, the creator, the most flexibility and versatility in such a modern camera. Now, it's a bit odd to say that something's both timeless and modern, but the way we've melded these two concepts together is truly elegant. Despite its small size, the 907X camera body isn't simply an adapter plate. It grows the idea of what a camera can be at its core and advances it into the future. Now, on the right side of the body, you can see three major elements. Firstly, controls to exposure settings are done with a command dial which surrounds the shutter button. And with the shutter button, I promise, if you've ever picked up and held or used a V-System camera before, your hands will fall right back into place with the 907X. Next in this view is the shift button, which when pressed and held allows you to toggle between certain exposure parameters like exposure compensation, or if you're in manual mode, toggling between shutter speed and aperture. With the 907X, of course, is its compatibility with Hasselblad's XCD lens family. Now, shown here on the slide is the XCD45, which gives you a field of view similar to about a 35mm lens on full frame. But in the XCD family, there are 9 different focal lengths from our widest lens ever at 21mm to a 135 telephoto and available 1.7 teleconverter, even a medium range zoom to 35 to 75. Besides that, you can use 12 different H-system lenses via the XH adapter, all while retaining the central shutter or leave shutter faculties. Adaptation using the electronic shutter mode in the camera allows you to use lenses from the X-Pan system, and even third-party options are also out there. The digital back sports a 50 megapixel 33 by 44mm image area that's over 1.5 times larger than full frame. It's the same sensor we've used in cameras like the X1D, X1D2, 907X Special Edition, and H6D50C, and it's the same sensor and same embedded color sciences that have allowed Hasselblad's cameras to rank at the top of their class in image quality and continue to be trusted by professionals everywhere for their most important work. On the back of the camera, you'll find a large 3.2-inch rear touchscreen with a 2.36 million dot resolution. Now, in the user feedback from other camera owners, we decided that the larger screen was an ideal platform for the Hasselblad user interface, which makes working with the camera so simple and so straightforward. The screen articulates with index points at 45 and 90 degrees and really is the best modern experience for waist level composing and shooting. Beneath the rear display, you'll find the advanced connectivity of the digital back, including a 3.5mm input for the microphone or cable release, and headphone for playing back video, since you can record HD or 2.7K video with the 907X. There's a 2.5mm input for flash if you're connecting a technical camera, the arc body, or a flex body, and a 3.5mm output for flash to synchronize with an external pack-in head system or monolight when you're using the 907X. Finally, there's a connector for EL bodies in the Winder CW, which allows you to fire these mechanical cameras from our desktop software if you're using something like a 500 ELM or a 503 series camera with the Winder attached. On the left side of the camera, you'll find a USB Type-C connector that's been fully recessed behind a door. Now, just like the X1D2, that USB port serves multiple purposes. Firstly, battery charging is done in the camera via the included wall adapter, and you of course have data transfer from this port at fast USB 3 speeds to desktop, phone, or tablet. Now, speaking of data transfer, the camera also features built-in Wi-Fi, which connects to our Phocus Mobile 2 app that we'll be talking about in a second. On the right side of the back, you'll find compartments for the battery, along with a release slider to eject it, and dual UHS 2 card slots. Now, I do encourage you to download the user manual, which is in today's handout section with tons more information about the 907X. If you're watching this as a recording, you can also find those on the My Hasselblad section of our website at hasselblad.com. We do get the question quite often as to why it's called 907X, and simply the visual impact of this camera draws so closely to the SWC or super wide camera series. Growing from the last generation 905 on the left of your screen is how we arrived at 907. And in that evolution, we went from that really lovely 38mm Biogon to a completely new level of modularity that allows you to use system components from the X system, V system, H system, and X-Pan components. Now, in this view on the 907X, you can actually see two optional accessories for the camera that I really actually consider quite lovely. The first is its optical finder, and it gives you a completely non-electronic way of composing and framing. Now, in its form, it features the vintage Hasselblad logo up top, calling back to the earliest generation of V-system cameras. And functionally speaking, it has frame lines for our three widest lenses, the XCD21, 30, and 45 or 45p. In the center are crosshairs that help you align with the default autofocus point on the 907X. Now, given the nature of an optical finder, its use and accuracy tends to favor wider lenses. Factors like handling, parallax alignment, and positioning can make it tougher to use with longer focal lengths. So we really do see it as a very simple and straightforward way of composing and photographing. The optical finder is made up of two components. Firstly, a bracket that replaces the nameplate on the 907X body, and the finder itself, which locks positively into the bracket shoe and can be released with two buttons on the side to prevent the finder from falling off. Next in these exciting accessories is the control grip, which gives you even more flexibility for the 907X50C. It attaches to the bottom of the camera body with integrated pogo pins for data transfer and provides an expanded physical control surface for the camera. Up top, you'll find a shutter button, along with 4 buttons that shortcut autofocus, manual focus toggling, AFD or autofocus drive. It'll bring up the menu screen or let you browse the images. These 4 buttons can also be remapped in the custom buttons menu to a multitude of different functions as well. Now behind that, you'll find a directional joystick, which grants you the ability to move the autofocus point, zoom into an image, or navigate menu settings quite easily. Finally, our traditional command dials at the fore and after the grip that allow for settings changes and general navigation in the camera. Just like the 907X at its core, the accessories are a reference to the past and really something that looks forward into the future. Just to get to know you a little bit better, we'd actually like to open up a poll here on which of the accessories that you see yourself using with the 907X. And while you're filling that out, I really do find that the camera completely built up is truly unique. In some ways, it's familiar, like shooting with an SWC and its finder up top. But in other ways, with the control grip, with the shortcut buttons and the joystick, it's truly a stunning modern camera. So we appreciate your response there. It looks like many of you are interested in both the OVF and the grip, and I agree, that's an amazing combination to have. So we'll go ahead and close out that poll there and appreciate your response there. That modernity and how you handle the camera and how you work with it and how it really is a step forward carries over into the next step of the workflow with how you'll be handling the images as well. And that modern mindset really carries over into the ways that we've expanded Phocus Mobile 2, our app for iPad and iPhone. Firstly, the expansion comes in supported cameras. The 907X 50C joins the X1D2 50C and 907X Special Edition in its compatibility with Phocus Mobile 2. Next, as mentioned, is host platforms or devices that you can run Phocus Mobile 2 on. Now, any device running iOS 12 or later can use Phocus Mobile 2. For example, iPhone 5S, you can run Phocus Mobile 2. I think that's amazing. What's really astounding though is that in this view, you basically have a powerful remote with a live image on the host device. Now from here, you're able to access the main features of the camera like adjusting exposure settings, firing the camera, autofocus drive or AFD, a depth of field preview from the live view, or changing metering modes. Now in this view, you can also enable options like a grid overlay or focus peaking. Speaking of focus, you can also remotely control the focus on the lens from the app simply by tapping the focus point icon and scrolling the wheel on the right. Similarly, so you can tap anywhere on the image on the screen to focus on that part of the scene. Now, these remote focus controls are available to the native X system lenses on the 907X and compatible H system lenses by the XH adapter. Simply, if the lens autofocuses normally on an X1D2 or the 907X, you can remotely focus with the app. Phocus Mobile 2 is an excellent connector between your Hasselblad camera and the rest of the world. It offers you the ability to import images from the SD card and export them in full resolution JPEG or unedited RAW. You can also install firmware updates through the app, provided you have a wired connection to the camera and access to the internet. On the iPad version of Phocus Mobile 2, the interface is a little bit different, and making use of the larger screen real estate, we actually have a few more exciting features in the iPhone version. Namely, the iPad version of Phocus Mobile 2 supports direct tethering from the camera to the iPad's internal storage, bypassing the SD card, very much similar how you would tether to a desktop computer. Now, at the moment, the iPad version offers editing capabilities like adjusting exposure, color, or crop adjustments. And the iPad version also offers an additional reduced resolution JPEG export option. Now, we won't go into the full detail of the new Phocus Mobile 2 workflow, but some other features that have been updated in this recent this app update are also the refreshed white balance tool that allow you to more easily select a preset or custom white balance with the eyedropper, and the option to copy and paste adjustments from one image to another. Now, if you're working with the latest version of Phocus for Mac or PC, which is version 3.5.2, we've also added the option to import embedded adjustments, meaning that edits that you make in Phocus Mobile 2 for iPad and export as a 3FR RAW file will be opened up in Phocus on desktop if you check the use embedded if available checkbox on desktop. So really nice handoff between the mobile or the tablet platform and on desktop. Summarizing the features available in Phocus Mobile 2 for both iPad and iPhone, both versions can connect wired or wirelessly to the X1D2 or 907X cameras. Both allow you to update camera and lens firmware when you have a wired connection to the camera itself and internet access. And both provide a beautiful live view image with remote controls over exposure settings or to capture an image to the SD card. Both allow you the ability to browse images already on the SD card and import them to the internal storage of your iPad or iPhone. And once imported, you can view and rate those files for easy organization. From that point, you can also share in the full resolution RAW or full resolution JPEG to any platform like social media, if you're uploading it to a Dropbox or just texting it to a friend. Now, the iPad version specifically adds the ability to record files straight from the camera to the iPad's internal storage, bypassing the SD card, along with image editing capabilities like crop, color, exposure corrections, and lens profiles. Finally, at the export stage, the iPad also offers a reduced resolution JPEG if, for example, you need to conserve file space or data bandwidth and send a smaller file size. Now, the differences here really do have a lot to do with the added processing power available to an iPad, but we're always looking to make improvements and innovations on our app platform with adjustments based on your feedback. Given the modularity of 907X and the flexibility of the camera platform, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of ways that you could build out a kit. Now, we've pulled some of our own Hasselblad staff and put together some inspiration of where you might use 907X. For example, street photographers will love the super compact XCD45P with its nearly silent leaf shutter. And when paired with the optical viewfinder, you have a setup where there's literally no blackout in composing the image. The hand grip gives you access to the core features of the camera very quickly, and you can share those images nearly instantly thanks to Wi-Fi connectivity with an iPhone and Phocus Mobile 2. Architectural photographers will really appreciate the balance of a big sensor and a small camera, and using some of our best wide-angle solutions ever. Lenses like the XCD21 can help you capture expansive interiors and exteriors with amazing image quality and no sacrifice in portability. Composing and reviewing images in the field is even easier thanks to the option of using an iPad Pro with a large screen that allows you to critically check for focus and exposure in the field. Landscape photographers will love how compactly a 907X kit will pack down. At its core is still this mind-bogglingly small camera body, and when paired with something like the XCD30, is an absolute dream for your next destination. Now, thanks to the modularity of 907X in a single package, you have a solution that's both a modern, mirrorless medium format digital camera and a futuristic transformation for Hasselblad's iconic V system. I know for many of you here today, myself included, cameras like a 500C are a milestone in one's photographic career. And the ability to have a powerful modern camera with cutting edge optics and a solution that allows me to use the V system, one of the most developed collections of components and photographic tools, is truly unique and incredibly empowering for a creative artist. In the earliest milestones of Hasselblad are the core ideas of flexibility, modularity, and versatility, and 907X really continues in that thought process when we as a camera manufacturer are using the engineering and ingenuity to reflect some of the best beliefs of thoughtful design and powerful features that really are meant to elevate creatives even further. In a moment, we'll be jumping to some of your questions that have been coming in, so do continue sending those our way by tapping either the question mark in the browser or the GoToWebinar app. But before we do that, we've actually got a question for you. Seeing the breadth of capabilities and modularity with the X system, we want to see what's most interesting to you. So we'll go ahead and open up a poll here and see how do you see yourself using the 907X? Is it just with XCD lenses as a super compact modular camera system? Is it just with V system cameras? Or do you see yourself living the best of both worlds? Whether that's someday shooting digitally in the X system lenses and someday shooting with a V system camera, or balancing the two. Surprisingly, it's actually pretty evenly split along the lines, and I will give a shout out to the small margin of folks using technical cameras. Appreciate you keeping the dream alive. So let's go ahead and close that poll. And we really do appreciate your response there. Now, finally, before we go to your questions, I'll take a moment to remind you about a few upcoming events. Tomorrow, I'll be chatting with photographer Austin Mann, talking about his travels around the world in every direction using both X and H system cameras, including a recent project in collaboration with Yo-Yo Ma. Next week, on Wednesday, we'll be hearing from Chicago-based photographer Dave Giordano, talking about his latest work in documenting the shifting landscape of Detroit and his arc as a commercial artist. And Thursday, my colleagues Chris and Mark will be bringing you a session on focus bracketing, a capability available on all X system cameras that I'm sure will bring this powerful feature into greater focus and greater depth. As always, you can check out future events and more product information along with inspirational artist interviews, how-to articles, user manuals, firmware updates, all on our website at hasselblad.com. We have a lot in store there, so do encourage you to check it out. But for now, let's go ahead and jump to your questions. And we'll start with Tom, who's asking us what the crop factor is between 6x6 film and the digital back. That's a great question. So on premise, we're comparing rectangles and squares, and it's been a minute since geometry, so I know squares are rectangles, but rectangles are not squares. But basically, when we look at the diagonal crop factor on 6x6 film, you have a 56x56 image area, and on the CFE2 digital back, you have a 33x44 millimeter image area. In short, we say a crop factor of 1.45 between the X system lens or from a V system lens to the X system lens. So an 80 millimeter multiplied by 1.45 is what you'd see on the 907X. Personally, I'm better suited towards what is being photographed or what is that lens being used for. So if we say like a standard lens with the 907X, that's a 65 millimeter thereabouts. On the V system with film, that's an 80 millimeter, all to get to about a 50 mil in full frame. So something to factor in mind. If there's a specific setup or a specific lens that you have in mind, definitely shoot us an email. After the session, you'll receive an automated message from us so you can reply directly to that, where we'll be happy to chat with you further on what lens gives you what field of view. Andy asks if I can shoot a square image on the 907X, and the answer is yes. Just like the X1D, X1D2, there's a built-in crop mode or overlay, which gives you aspect ratio options for 1:1 square, 2:3, 16:9, 6:7, X-pan. I'm sure I'm missing a few in that very long menu. Now, this is just an overlay, meaning that when you're composing in live view, you'll see that overlay and that mask, and you can vary the opacity, but it is reversible when you process the images in Phocus. So you can actually recrop the images after you shoot them to pre-visualize that 1:1 area. Gary asks us a great question, why we would choose the X1D2 over the 907X. And that's a tough question. Admittedly, my personal answer is both, but it's really about how you'll be using the camera. With the X1D2, you have everything built into one package, the EVF, really bright and lovely, and the top hot shoe that syncs with Nikon flashes. And with the 907X, you have modularity, what's in front of me. So you have the ability to go from V system to X system. If you own H lenses, you can use the XH adapter. So it's really about, do you want everything built into one, or do you want the level of modularity between the two? Now, safely, both cameras offer really stunning image quality, and both offer the Hasselblad natural color solution. So there's no real sacrifice at the sensor level of image quality, but it's really about, again, a balance of how you'll be using the camera and where you'll be applying it for. Leslie asks how we can compose using a 500 cm using the smaller sensor since there's a crop factor. That's an excellent question. So included is a mask, a little adhesive mask, this guy, that adheres to the top of the focusing screen. Make a very important distinction here. It applies to the shiny side, the top side of the focusing screen, not the bottom side, not the matte side. But it is an opaque layer, so you can't see through it because it's opaque plastic. So if you're shooting still, film, and digital, we recommend actually a replacement focusing screen that gives you both the full 6:6 image area and etched lines for 33:44 in the sensor. My colleagues are mentioning that it's part number 3042264. If we can drop that into the chat, that'd be great. And you can order that from any authorized Hasselblad retailer. My personal preference is the focusing screen, but it's nice that we offer a solution in the box with the mask just to get you up and running. Larry is asking us if H lenses will work with the 907X. Yes, with an asterisk. Just as it was with the X1D2 and the X1D, you can use the XH adapter to use H system lenses. Now, newer lenses with the orange square indication or marking will have autofocus and leaf shutter up to 1/2000th of a second, while some of the older lenses will only offer manual focus and a minimum shutter speed of 1/800th of a second. Now, this depends completely on the age of the lens or the firmware that's currently on the lens. So in specific cases, I encourage you to get in touch afterwards and we can investigate further. Terry asks us how we compose when using a 501 cm in the digital back. That's a great question. So the beauty of the system is that it acts just like a film magazine. So on the back, where I normally would control ISO by switching through different emulsions of film, I control ISO on the digital back. But other than that, you attach it just like you would an A12 magazine, and you're good to go. So you're still composing through the waist level finder or prism finder if you've got it. The nice thing about the CFE 250C and its previous generation is that the curvature of the back does accommodate prisms like the PM90 or PME90 that have a little bit of an overhang. So in this case, with the 500C, I'm composing through the waist level finder and just firing the camera. No dark slide to be had. With the camera configured for the 500 body, it detects a check pin on the rear of the camera and just knows that it's capturing an image anywhere from the 500th minimum shutter speed on the lens up to 68 minutes if you're using bulb mode. The same applies to 200, 2000 EL and SWC cameras from the SWC-M4. You don't need to use any cables. Now there's a caveat here. Given the mechanical tolerances and wear that happens on V-System cameras, sometimes you might need to send the camera in for CLA. I mean, we generally recommend CLA regularly anyways, but on our website under the support section, you can find the Hasselblad, the authorized Hasselblad service center nearest you, or send it in through a dealer where they can get everything checked and back up to spec for proper working order. I have a follow-up question as well, how we use live view with the mirror up. So basically you would start live view on the digital back and then set the lens for bulb exposure. Now, on some 500Cs, there's not a locking to hold the lens open. On 500C M4, there is. But basically, you would act like you're making a long exposure and open up live view on the rear back. And the same applies if you're using the video mode as well. You just lock the lens open. Ron asked us a very interesting question. When will sell the CFV2 digital back on its own? Valid question. And we don't have a specific date or timeline for this. And really, it's because we believe that the combination of 907X together with the CFE 250C gives you the most flexibility when it comes to a modular camera system, and the ability to go from V-System components to the most cutting edge X-System lenses is really powerful. Now, admittedly, the first time I used the digital back on a V-System camera, I thought that was everything I would ever want, like all the dreams coming true, until I started looking at the photos and posts and quickly realized that my eyes are not what they used to be. So having that fallback option, having the ability to have an autofocus lens combination like this is really amazing, especially with the 45p. It's such a compact camera system. We have a question about the other super wide cameras, SWA and SWC. Unfortunately, the compatibility is limited to the SWC M4. There's some tolerances and fitment gaps there that make it possible. So it's really important that when you look at the camera system, do check out the menu, or excuse me, the manual that's in the handout section. Also online, if you're watching the recording, and it'll go down every possible supported camera. We have a question here of why we switched from the switch the display between the special edition and the large display, and it's really us responding to user feedback. We saw the opportunity to have a more polished solution. So with the 907X Special Edition in its limited run, I believe is still truly a well sought after camera and really wonderful and unique. And with the standard edition 907X, the chrome trim, making updates, making improvements to the benefit of the photographer, so we have the best platform out there possible. Let's see. I have a question about if the lenses can resolve properly for 50 megapixels. It's a tough answer. Some of the older V-System lenses, they're meant for film, and they're not the best, most modern technology, but some of the lenses like the 250 SA, for example, absolutely stunning lens that works beautifully on the 50 megapixel sensor. And it of course varies by subject matter. So it'll vary by what you're shooting, the application, the exposure, the f-stop that you're working at. But I think the best solution is to try it out. So after the session, you'll receive that automated email. Let us know where you are, any of your other questions, and we'll happily follow up with you. If it's safe to meet in person for a demonstration or suggest a retailer, a Hasselblad retailer, we'll definitely go with that. Let's see. We have a question about the OVF. Definitely. So OVF has two parts, as mentioned. The first is the bracket here, which we'll do it live. So digital back comes off, and the nameplate on top that says Hasselblad comes out, and the bracket slides in. So there we have it here, and then we reattach the digital back. So if you're very familiar with the V-System, this action is familiar. The digital back comes off to switch a prism. And then on top here, you can see that it looks like a standard hot shoe, but it has two locking buttons, and there's a recess for the lock fitment of the viewfinder. So what's nice is that once it's locked in, the viewfinder is not going anywhere. The caution we'll make is that we don't recommend putting any other hot shoe style accessories in here because of the locking mechanism, depending on how the specific accessory fits and may get stuck. So really the bracket is meant for the OVF primarily. If you need a hot shoe or a cold shoe to hold something like a flash transmitter, a very simple tripod bracket and cold shoe is an excellent solution. And we also have a question here from Catalina, love that name, sorry, Katiana, how a strap attached and if the hand strap is available. So on the sides of the camera, there are two eyelets here. Included with it is a set of split rings and a camera strap like a shoulder or neck strap. We don't at the moment offer a hand strap specifically for the 907X, but on the bottom, it's a very standard quarter 20 fitment that can support a wrist strap or hand strap as well. Oh, great question about Phocus Mobile 2, or yeah, Phocus Mobile 2. When switching to, or when using Wi-Fi to connect to the camera, you do have to switch back to export the files. So yeah, great question there from John. So is there a batch mode to export to Dropbox, or must I tether the camera? So if your plan is to export the files to another program pretty instantly, I recommend the wired connection. Firstly, it's faster in terms of getting data from the camera to the device. And similarly, it frees up the Wi-Fi connection on the iPad, for example, if you're looking to export them to another program or a cloud sharing solution. You can multi-select files and then click the export and share option if you'd like. So you're able to export them en masse. And likewise, if you're using the latest version of iPad OS or iOS, you can also use the Files app to move files around independently of Phocus Mobile 2. But of course, the settings changes, you do have to export the file with 3FR in order for those to transfer from the app to desktop. We have a question about how do we meter with a V system camera and the digital back using from Eddie. So when you have the digital back on a V system camera, it's manual exposure only. So you can set ISO from the digital back, but shutter speed and aperture are still controlled from the lens, just like you would with film. That's simply because there's no light passing through the camera to the digital back until you make the exposure. Now, of course, with the 907X, you have the ability as a modern mirrorless medium format camera to pass light through. So you have all the automated modes from program to aperture priority, that sort of thing. So tons of flexibility in there. But when you're using a V system camera, there's no metering functions in the digital back, but you could use something like a PME finder with a meter in there. And you know, it's honestly closer to film than it is for than digital. I have a question about the hand grip. Good question. Is there a tripod socket on the bottom? And there is. So we'll go ahead and do this live. So attaching to the bottom of the 907X, what I love is that there are indexing pins, which means that it's very tough to, or it's almost impossible to accidentally rotate the control grip out of alignment here. And then on the bottom here, you have a standard quarter 20 socket to attach it to anything else. So really nice, really compact. Personally, this is my favorite combination, 45p digital back with the tilt screen at 45 and 90, and then when you want it, optical viewfinder as well. We have a question about DC power for the digital back. Great question, especially for our tech cam users. So power options for the 907X are immense. Firstly, there's USB Type-C power pass-through, meaning that if you have a battery in the digital back, you can pass through power to it to recharge the battery through the USB Type-C port. So for example, if you're tethered, this will happen automatically. If you're out in the field, say for example, making long exposures at night or something, you can power the camera partially from that USB Type-C port. Now on the bottom of the digital back, there's also a DC power input. It gives you a wide range, about 12 to 24 volts for power input. So if you've already set up something like for the H1600C digital back, you'll have something very similar to power it all day. So really nice opportunity there. A lot of flexibility, and we really meant to mimic and chase after that level of modularity and flexibility with the V system here. I have a question about the RAW files coming out in the 907X. So yeah, there's the same 3FR RAW file, so 3FR written to the SD card. If you're shooting to Phocus Mobile 2 in the same format, and then in Phocus for desktop, you convert to FFF or the unpackaged files. If you are using Lightroom or still on a bridge to camera raw to Photoshop workflow, it's the same 3FR file architecture as you find on other Hasselblad cameras. So tons of flexibility there. You know, great options in terms of post-processing, but for the best image quality, our Phocus programs on iPad or desktop are really the best. And again, it's now even easier thanks to the embedded adjustments option. We have a question from Piero about an SWC from 1959. Can it be used? So again, the SWCM forward, so it's possible that that specific model won't be supported. But again, do follow up with us afterwards. We can get a little bit more information. Have a lot of questions about lenses. So first one is, do I have autofocus with the H-system lenses? Again, through the XH adapter, depending on the firmware in the lens. If it's 119 or later, then you'll have autofocus. That's basically the latest generation of 1/800th of a second lenses and all of the orange square lenses. But you can easily check the firmware either by attaching it to an X camera or an H camera, seeing what's on there. And then, we're happy to help you out with the options down the road for what's available. So with the compatible H lenses and the X lenses, you of course have remote manual focus through Phocus Mobile 2. And with the older H system lenses that are only manual focus, you'll still have leaf shutter up to the maximum 1/800th of a second. Tony has a question about cable releases. Yep, the microphone input below the rear screen can be used to plug in a cable release. The cable release X, for example, is one of my favorite little accessories. You can also remotely fire the cable from any of the Phocus programs, so iPhone or iPad or desktop if you're in the studio, allow you to attach that cable release and remotely fire the camera. We have a question about what cameras can be still CLA'd or cleaned, lubricated, and aligned or adjusted. It will vary by service center to service center. Safely, the 500 forward and are easily serviced along with recent model 200 series focal plane cameras. We start running into some limitations on parts availability and that sort of thing. But again, it makes everything will be case by case basis here. So again, follow up with us afterwards. So we are running into the tail end of our scheduled time here, but do love seeing your questions come in. Again, if you have something incredibly pressing and you're very curious, do follow up with us one-on-one. So we're happy to chat with you offline. Have a question again about hot shoes. How can we attach a flash transmitter? So the shoe here on top is really meant for the optical viewfinder. Personally, I recommend just any third-party, hot shoe bracket that attaches to the bottom and gives you a cold shoe, helps separate things out. If you're using a V system camera, you of course have the accessory rail, or you can use a prism like a PM90 or PME90 with a hot shoe on top. So some flexibility there. Have a request for an updated Phocus Mobile 2 tutorial. So we are working on it. So definitely in the works. We have a question about the 45p versus the 45. So two really interesting lenses. The XCD45 is a 3.5 mil aperture lens, and it's one of the first generation XCD lenses. Really excellent optical quality, really beautiful lens. And then with the 45p, we have an f4, so a little bit slower in the aperture, but much more compact and nearly silent leaf shutter. The 3.5 includes a lens hood or a lens shade, and with the design of the XCD45p, optically it's stunning. It's very resistant to flare on its own, but there's also a bit of a recess, and it uses standard 62mm accessories, so you have the option to use a third-party hood as well. Have a question about weather resistance from Mark here. Great question. So on the 907X, there are some basic seals like on the rear door, on the car door, to prevent dust and splash ingress, but best rule of practice is common sense. So because it's a modular camera system, even though there are lens seals around the lens and lens bayonet and ports, it's got moving parts. The camera back comes off, and because of the tolerances between one camera and another, we can't necessarily use the put a seal in between a V system camera and the digital back. So common sense applies, but this is somewhere where the X1D2 has a nice advantage of having a little bit more sealing around the front. So we'll take a few more questions in the stretch here. I am seeing the option to stop the share screen so you can see me. Sorry about that there. Let's see here. How do we transmit flash from the 907 to a flash system? So on the port selection here, there's a 3.5mm flash output. So you could take a 3.5mm to PC sync or 3.5 to 3.5. from to any third-party flash transmitter, and that'll sync in this configuration of 907X. If you're using a V system camera, it's a throwback. You just connect to the PC port on the lens, and flash sync passes from the lens to your flash system, just like we have for Nion 70 years now. If you're using a focal plane camera, plug it into the PC sync port on the camera body itself. Now, if you're using like a technical camera or an adapted system, this is where it gets interesting. You would use the flash in, the 2.5 mil port, to connect from the lens of that technical camera to the digital back, and that tells the digital back to capture an image. And then for a flash system, you would use the flash out to sync with flash. So that and a ton more details are in the user manual. So we'll pick the last couple of questions here. Is there any shooting information in the viewfinder of the optical finder? It is an optical path only. So when you look through it, there's a visualization in the menu, but you only see frame lines for 21, 30, and 45 along the center cross mark. So there's no data being overlaid or anything. It's probably hard to see on the broadcast, but it really is a very simple way of composing and shooting. If you view something like an SWC, it's frame lines to compose the image, and now with the center hash mark for the autofocus point. So great question there. I love it because there's no blackout. It's just straightforward, simple optical paths. So nice to see here. One last question, how do we shoot in portrait mode? Robert, that's a great question. So with a V system camera, it's a little bit awkward. You have to go like this. If you own a 503 series camera with the winder CW option, it's a bit nicer where you have the hand grip. And this is really something where the 907X and the control grip really excel, because you're really only going like this, hitting the wall, going like this. So it's weird. We're going from rectangles to squares, or excuse me, squares to rectangles, but with a little bit of adaptation, and that's kind of the flexibility that's granted to you with the 907X. And when I say that it is really unlocking some of the best thinking modularity and open-endedness of the system, it's really powerful to see that going through. Will we need a wake-up cable with a technical camera from Ian? We'll make that the last question of the day. Depending on the setup, but for the most part, no. On the digital back in technical camera mode, you can set an exposure time from like 1/16 of a second all the way to 2 seconds. So it's looking for that signal, and will rely on the shutter in the lens of that technical camera. There are a lot of variables out there, so we always say your mileage may vary. So we recommend taking a look at the user manual. There's also a document that, if you're curious, it's the technical camera combination manual written by my colleagues Uwe and Chris. You can reach out to us, and we'll definitely chat with you from there. So thus closeth the 907X webinar. I do want to thank you for joining us today. It's an absolute honor to talk about such an amazing camera system, and really glad to see your passion and energy about the camera. Do check out future events on the Hasselblad website at hasselblad.com/events. And well, we'll see you next time. Glad to have you here.
We are now introducing the CFV250C and the 907X. By combining the classic aesthetic of Hasselblad cameras and the capability of modern digital photography, it presents the absolute best of both worlds.